Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's one and only V the Guerrilla Economist, and I have with me the man who needs no introduction. It is Harley Schlanger himself. You can find his work over at LaRouchePack.com and the SchillerInstitute.org. And with that out of the way, Harley, welcome back. It is great to have you, my friend.
Well, V, it's always good talking with you.
It's always a pleasure. Same here. Harley, there's so many things going on here. Where do you want to pull this yarn, this ball of yarn that we call the geopolitical, geostrategic world? Let's do a deep dive. What's on your radar screen?
Let's start with an event that took place the Saturday before this last one, and then a follow up this last Saturday, where we had three very significant personalities. And when I say we, it's LaRouche Pack.
Right.
We had Colonel Richard Black, the former director of criminal law for the Pentagon. He was with the JAG Corps and then became the director of criminal law in the Pentagon. We also had Bill Binney, who's known to a lot of your listeners, and Kirk Wiebe, two of the people who were whistleblowers against the secret government, the security state that was set up after 9/11, and were not just penalized, but were threatened for what they had to say. The three of them gave these presentations where they laid out an absolutely chilling and frightening scenario. First, what Colonel Black laid out is that he fears a military coup is underway. And he took the statements in the last 4 months from people like General Mattis, Colin Powell, the former head of NATO troops in Europe, a number of other individuals, and then paired them with these comments in Defense One magazine, these two colonels who said if Trump doesn't go, the military is going to have to remove him, assuming, first of all, that Trump was going to lose, and secondly, that he wouldn't leave office.
Right.
And then a follow up article on 6 scenarios for January 20th, 2021, which goes through again the need for a military intervention to remove Trump. Now, here's what's interesting. What is Defense One magazine? I'd never heard of it before,
Me
but
neither.
it's owned by Laurene Powell Jobs, the widow of Steve Jobs, who's now
Oh
a
God.
billionaire. And of course, she made her money from her husband at Apple Computer. Apple is part of the deep state, along with Yahoo, Google,
No,
Amazon.
Harley, don't say that. They're lovers of iPhones who wait for days outside of an Apple store, Harley, camping with camping equipment and stoves and water filtration devices, looking like they're about to go on an outdoor excursion, waiting to buy the same exact phone that they already have in their pocket. Don't
And you
tell them
can
that
be
their beloved
sure
Apple is part of the deep state.
you can be sure that Apple has pictures of them before and after they get their phone. Now, here's the important thing about Jobs. Not only did she set up this Defense One, but she set up a couple of other organizations, including the Organization to Protect Journalists, which is involved in all kinds of regime change coups. But she also bought Atlantic Monthly. Now, Atlantic Monthly had the article claiming that Trump made some despicable comments about the World War One dead, which of course it turns out he never made. The guy who
Right.
wrote the article, Jeffrey Goldberg, who insisted he had four reliable sources, after all of the people who could have possibly been sources denied that they heard anything, he said, well, maybe the White House is accurate in that, but I know that's what Trump feels. Now, in the meantime, CNN and Fox did their own so called independent confirmation that Trump said that. This has been all over the media the last week or so. And it fits in with what Colonel Black is saying that there's an effort to convince the military that Trump is against the military, that he is working with Putin,
Yeah.
and that the military must be prepared to do something. And then Woodward, in his book, has a quote from Jim Mattis to Dan Coates, the former director of national intelligence, where Mattis said, Trump despises the truth. You can't trust him. We must be prepared to take some action in the future. Now,
Hmm.
with Woodward, you never know whether it's a real quote or not. But the fact that Mattis didn't deny it and it's now out in public, this is part of a plan to convince the military to minimally step aside or more likely to step in in the event that we have a constitutional crisis after the election, which would be provoked by what? Mail-in voting. And
Sure.
whether you're convinced that mail-in voting is rife with fraud or not, the fact is that it may take another month before you sort out the mail-in votes. So on election eve, we may have a picture of Trump with a massive landslide in the regular vote in the Electoral College. And then as the mail-in votes trickle in, suddenly it's turned around, and a month or two later, we have a constitutional crisis because Biden will be claiming victory. Now, this is all part of the ongoing coup effort against Trump. We saw Russiagate, a total fabricated fraud.
Right.
And by the way, I met with a very interesting figure today in German-Russian relations who just got back from Russia, and he said they can't believe in Russia that they're still saying that Putin ran the election. He said that when it's the common joke at cocktail parties that anyone from anyone of the government who might be there, he's taking time off to come to the cocktail party from rigging the U.S. election.
Hmm.
Now, so at the same time you had Russiagate, then you had Ukrainegate. And by the way, who was one of the key figures in Ukrainegate? Well, it was none other than Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, active duty military guy working in conjunction with the National Security Agency and John Brennan. So you have this coup in place, but the fact that military people are being involved and it's being promoted by what is the modern version of the military industrial complex, which is not just arms producers and people directly involved in military and defense boondoggles, but more broadly, it's now the security state apparatus, Google, Amazon, Yahoo, and so on. You know, where does Amazon fit in? Bezos got a contract for $600 million to run the cloud computing operation for the CIA. And this is the guy who owns the Washington Post. So we're getting our news from the same people who want to fight these wars and are totally desperate to get rid of Trump because Trump doesn't want to fight these wars. And so for all the listeners who are out there saying, well, Trump didn't do what he said, Trump's not good, how do we know he's not a Zionist agent? If all those things were true, why are they still going head over heels to try and get rid of him?
Exactly.
Including trying to elect a guy who is mentally challenged, who's got a running mate who is a totally ambitious, and I think this is the right word to use, killer,
Mm-hmm.
because she was willing to send people to their death in California without releasing documents that by law had to be released.
My question, Harley, to the Democratic Party: how do you find, how do you find somebody that's more unlikable than Hillary Clinton? And they've outdone themselves.
Well, you know, I think on a personal basis, Joe Biden might be more likable than Hillary Clinton because the
Oh, I'm
idea.
talking about Kamala.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, how are they able to get? And they picked Kamala Harris, who's way more unlikable and unrelatable and more cringy than Hillary Clinton. It's incredible.
Well, and here's the other thing that's interesting. You know, supposedly she's setting a new standard for women as a person of color who's running as a woman for vice president. And this is really good for the Me Too movement and for young women. She got her power in California by sleeping her way to the top.
Yeah,
Is that what you want to say to young women?
exactly. Put on a pair of knee pads, ladies. If you have the right liberal agenda and you have a good pair of knee pads, you too can make it to the top
And
in
you can
political
find someone,
America.
and you can find someone as corrupt as Willie Brown, the former
Absolutely.
Speaker of the California Assembly. So
Hmm.
that's how she got her start. And the fact that the liberals seem to overlook the fact that her policy for fighting forest fires in California was keep nonviolent offenders in prison so they would have to do the slave labor firefighting jobs. You know, that gives you a sense of how you're going to be screwed in new ways if this team gets in, because Biden is not long for the job. You know, it's pretty clear that Biden may last 2 or 3 months if he gets elected. I don't know if you saw the latest, but Joe Rogan offered to do a 4-hour podcast debate between Trump and Biden. Trump immediately agreed to it, and they can't find anyone from the Biden team who will comment on it. Biden would say, "I'll do it, but we have to have 2 nap times in there."
They need to have a nap time and a 65-inch teleprompter behind Joe Rogan that he could read off of. Bring it up a little more. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, there was a time in this country that I believed that the policies of put end quote. That's what you would hear, Harley.
Oh, I know. Now, in the meantime, what as much as we enjoy making fun of this Democratic ticket and the absolute idiocy that is represented in it, we have to look at something else, which is that from Russia and China, there's a growing sense that there will be a war with the United States. The latest is this Navalny affair. This is completely absurd. The Navalny uh, was never going to be elected president of Russia. He's a
Correct.
minor figure who was built up by the George Soroses and the non-governmental organizations and so on. And then immediately you get sick and you go to Porton Down, the British Chemical Warfare Lab, to prove it was Novichok. Now they get some doctor from the French military and from the Swedish military confirming it's Novichok. And what's going on here? If Putin wanted to get rid of him, he wouldn't use defective Novichok. They could get rid of him. The
Easily.
question is, what does Putin gain by making this guy a martyr? Now, the other question that's immediate is, what does the West gain by blaming Putin? And you see two things. Putin's not coming to New York for the United Nations General Assembly, so there'll be no meeting with Trump. This is something that Trump and Putin have been planning on since last March. They've had at least 8 telephone discussions to talk about coming together to push forward the nuclear arms pact, the so-called the new START pact. That's
Yeah.
not going to happen before the election. Secondly, they're escalating the German-Russian hostility. Many of the businessmen in Germany, the industrialists, the small and medium businesses, want relations with Russia. They want to do
Right.
business with Russia. But at this point,
There's
they're
about
not able to.
600,000 of them, Harley.
Yeah. At this point, they're not able to. And what they're probably going to do is cancel the Nord Stream pipeline, which is not just providing gas and oil to Germany, but to 12 other countries in Europe. Now, in Germany, if you get rid of this Nord Stream 2 pipeline, at the same time you're shutting down nuclear and coal, you're not going to have any electricity. And that's a fact. So Germany is going to go from one of the most technologically progressive nations on the planet with the highest per capita productivity, except possibly for Japan. It's going to go into a dark age.
Yep.
And who's leading it? Merkel.
Yep. Well, she decides also, Harley, that not only to kowtow to the neocons that are in the U.S. deep state, guys like Pompous Pompeo, but also to listen to the environmental ardents, those who are the great scientific minds of our time, like Greta von Thunberg.
Yeah. Well, who Merkel just met with a couple of weeks ago.
Oh yeah, I mean, she knows. She knows
She had
everything. I mean,
no time to meet with Putin, but
no,
an hour and a half to meet with Greta.
to meet with a brain damaged child, basically a brain damaged child. Isn't it amazing also that we had Gavin Newsom, who seems to have really lost his mind as he was standing in a burned forest, Harley, and smiling, talking about climate change as the reason of the forest fires and the fact that they don't have no water in California. It's incredulous to me.
There's an interesting side light on this one. In the 1960s, there was a program called North American Water and Power Alliance, which in the late 70s and early 80s, Lyndon LaRouche became a big supporter of. This is one that would build trenches that would bring water from the northern Canadian Rockies and Alaska through Washington, Oregon, and California that would provide more than 200% more water than is currently consumed. This was shut down. Why? Environmentalists who say you're not allowed to mess with rivers. Don't mess with the water in Canada. You know where that water in Canada goes? it flows into the ocean. Nobody uses it.
Right.
And
Trump
this is
actually mentioned this.
Well, John Kennedy was a supporter of this. Bobby
Hmm.
Kennedy was a supporter of this. This used to be the Democratic Party. Think big, go with big projects. And this is how you would green the deserts and make sure the forests don't burn, and combine that with clearing the forests, which is competent environmental policy. But you're not allowed to touch even the dead wood in the forest because you might disturb a hamster.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So it's
Ridiculous.
blamed on climate change. Well, to the extent there's climate change, it's not caused by combustion engines or factories or people making a living. It has to do with the nature of the physical universe, the solar radiation, the tilt of our solar system, the solar flares. These are things that are not determined by whether you're driving a Tesla or an old-fashioned Volkswagen Beetle. The idea that if you penalize human living standards to cool the planet is an absurd formulation coming from fake scientists who are not even scientists.
No, they're lawyers.
One of the things that, or journalists, one of the things that gets me is Bill McKibben, uh, who's at Middlebury College, who was a journalism teacher for many years, is now the great expert on climate science. He doesn't have any scientific degree. What he does is he reads press releases that come from the green agenda, which is funded by the leading banks and financial institutions that want to use green policy for a carbon tax and to shut down industry
Right.
and reduce
Exactly
the
correct.
population while they're at it.
Unbelievable. Harley, any updates from China on your end? Where do they see this going as the U.S. elections are barreling down upon all of us?
Well, the Chinese are, on the one hand, making very sharp statements against Pompeo and his claims that China is in an aggressive imperial position, building up uh, military bases all over the world. There was an article that was put out by one of these anti China think tanks in Washington, D.C., that was written by the guy who drafted Obama's Asia Pivot, the Trans Pacific Partnership. And he concluded in the article by saying, well, the fact is, China is not militarizing the ports they're building, but they are trying to get global hegemony by improving the economic situation in these Asian countries. Now, would we go to war because China is improving the economy in poor countries? That's what his article basically said. And that's
Unbelievable.
the Obama policy. It's anti development, it's anti human. And while Trump is being boxed in on this China question, largely because of the way the whole coronavirus story is being played, and he's looking for someone to blame, he should go back to his original point. It's Obama and Bush who tore down the public health system in the United States. To the extent we're having a problem dealing with it, it's because we've had fewer hospitals, fewer hospital beds, fewer public health professionals, and less money spent overall on health care for the American people. Obama did an insurance policy scam, a for profit hospital scam, and he called it Obamacare. And now Biden says he's going to make it even bigger and better. Well, that means that unless you're a billionaire, you won't be able to afford health care under Joe Biden. So with China, the Chinese are doing two things. They're saying that they're going to have to upgrade their military if the United States is going to start sending more ships to the China Sea, to the Strait of Taiwan, and so on. But at the same time, they're saying, look, there's nothing incompatible between making America great again and China realizing the Chinese dream. Why can't we work together? And there's some very interesting statements coming out from Chinese newspapers to this effect. Now, I want to say one thing on this, V, because I get some flack from some of your listeners who say, what am I, a PR guy for China? No,
Yeah.
I'm someone who doesn't believe we have to go to war just because another country is making progress economically.
Bingo.
We're strong enough that if China does something to seriously impact our nation's security, we can handle it. But
Correct.
we're the ones who are destroying our economy. It's the corporations. It's the banks. It's the speculative swindlers who are the ones like Kyle Bass and Steve Bannon who are funding the regime change crowd in China.
Hmm.
And Trump should go back to his idea of talking to Xi Jinping. Do we see eye to eye on everything with China? No. Do we want the Chinese system here in the United States? No, but that's not the alternative. The alternative is, can great powers work together to build a better world? And Trump was on course to do that with the phase one trade agreement, and it got disrupted by people who are political opportunists who are trying to find an easy scapegoat rather than the legitimate scapegoat, which is Bush and Obama, which is
Yeah.
how Trump won in 2016 by showing that Hillary would continue the Bush Obama policies, which is, of course, what Biden and Harris would do. So I would say to people who want to jump on me and say I'm a communist Chinese party agent, no, I'm an American patriot who doesn't think that we need to spend 800 billion to 1.2 trillion dollars a year to fight enemies that don't want to fight. And instead, we should be spending that money on innovation, on research and development, on reviving our manufacturing sector, and sitting down with the Chinese and working on things we can do together, like solving the problem with North Korea.
Yep. Exactly correct. Exactly correct. And that's the way you work at things by getting into mutually beneficial trade agreements. It's a win-win situation. And when you have great powers that agree on these economic benefits, the chance for not only war is greatly diminished, but the massive chance for global prosperity is increased tenfold, Harley.
Well, and there's another simple point here, which is that the so-called Thucydides trap, that you have to go to war. If you're a declining power, you have to go to war with the rising power before it overtakes you, is in the past, it's been a tragedy for
Yeah,
both powers.
correct.
We're declining because we've made bad decisions. We elected George W. Bush and the neocons. We
Yep.
elected Barack Obama and the globalist crew around him who were committed to tearing down the United States industry for an anti growth policy.
Yeah.
Now, we have to change that. That had nothing to do with China. The idea that the Chinese are wrecking the United States, who in the US Congress is run by China who voted for the trade agreements? No one.
Mm. Hmm.
They're being paid by the big banks and the speculative swindlers to do that.
Right.
So we've got to clean up our act. And
Look,
instead of looking for foreign enemies, let's root out the ones we have who are already in our two parties.
right. I'll tell you right now, you you can't dump. I mean, Jack Ma said it best. You can't dump $30 trillion in foreign escapades, in perpetual war, and then complain about that your economy sucks. I mean, how stupid. You got nobody to blame but ourselves, Harley. That's what pisses me off. Nobody's got the adult mentality to take a hard look in the mirror, Harley. We lost the bloody culture, even before Bush and Obama. When you look at it, we've allowed, in the 60s and 70s, we allowed Marxists to capture our high school, middle school, and higher education um, uh, uh, that's in this country. And we've allowed that to occur. And then we're wondering why, kids have no morals. Our children are, Harley, I hate to say this, man. But the majority of kids in America are stupid. They are damn stupid. They are beyond stupid. And parents think, oh, I got my kid an iPad that somehow makes them smart. There are kindergartners and preschoolers in China and India that know C plus and Python and JavaScript. Give me a break. I don't care your kid knows how to play, Angry Birds on your iPad that makes them smart. Majority of American kids cannot compete. And we've lost it culturally and educationally. We need a real American renaissance to recapture who we are, Harley. Otherwise, we are lost. Otherwise, even if we do get a lot of the things done with Donald, that Trump wants to achieve, we will eventually. We're just biding time. That just buys us more time on the clock. eventually we'll fall back into the rot because the real gangrene of culture has never been dealt with.
Well, the irony, V, will be that if we do get a recovery, we're going to have to bring in foreign workers to man the artificial intelligence
Yeah.
production lines and so on because Americans are not learning what's
No.
needed to do that.
No.
And this is something that Lyndon LaRouche has been warning about for years. But I want to call people's attention to something. Go to the LaRouche Pack website and look at the event for last Saturday. What was Saturday? The 12th of September, where we had Richard Black, Bill Binney, and Kirk Wiebe talking about the emergence of the security state and how that security state is not only running a coup today, but is doing exactly what you were just saying,
Yep.
destroying the educational capability of the population. There are
Correct.
two quotes that are played from Lyndon LaRouche at the beginning of that event. The first one was from January 3rd, 2001, where he predicted that Bush would run the economy into the ground. It wasn't in very good shape after Clinton, but it would be run into the ground under Bush and Cheney, setting up the need for a Reichstag fire event in 2001 to allow them to move ahead with foreign wars and other diversionary tactics and setting up a security state. Then there was the interview with Lyndon LaRouche on the morning of September 11th, 2001, where he's asked by a radio host as the planes are flying into the buildings, what's happening here? And LaRouche said it had to have a security intelligence component to it because you can't just hop into a plane and fly it into a building. Either people really screwed up, which is unlikely, or it was orchestrated. And he
Right.
said, why was it orchestrated? Precisely because we're going into economic hard times and they want to change the subject. They want a
Yep.
new enemy and new wars. So if you look at what LaRouche said in those two events in 2001, and then telescope from there to where we are today, we're seeing an escalation of the same tactics with the security state much bigger because of its control over media, its control over social media, think about what they're doing with this virtual schooling now, where you don't even have teachers anymore. There are still some good teachers around, but if you put it all on computers, you are going to destroy the minds of children. And I say that having three young children who are in the school system here in Germany, where they're
Yeah.
still more traditional than in the US.
Right. Exactly correct. I can't begin to fathom the amount of times where laptops and iPads were brought into classrooms to help the children. Harley, this was, a few years back when they started incorporating this, and testing scores and aptitude tests have plummeted. It's
Aptitude and everything except finding your mother's password so you can get onto her iPad.
yeah, that and one part where our children excel in the United States is pop culture. Nobody knows more about pop culture and entertainers and reality shows and dance moves and internet challenges better than American kids, man. I encourage anybody. Harley, I don't know if you got it. If you saw this documentary, it's called 12 Million Minutes. Have you heard of it?
No.
It was done a few years ago. It was done by an American venture capitalist. And what he's done is, I mean, this is a guy who's a billionaire. He works in the tech sector, and his biggest problem was finding young talent out of college who were smart enough to handle the fast pace of of technology, and couldn't find them. And then he had to bring in work from guys from India and China and
Yeah,
and,
why do you
and
think so
Korea.
much of our online discussion now is with technicians in India?
Correct, 1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%. And so, at 12 million minutes, the movie did they tracked, three of the top students in the United States versus three of the top students in China versus three of the top students in India. And they monitored 12 million minutes, which is the amount of time it takes from the time they enter their freshman year to the time they graduate as a senior. And then you see the Indian and the Chinese kids. They're learning classical music. They're learning history. They're learning mathematics. They're learning science. They're learning calculus, trigonometry, this, that, and the other, programming, this, that. I mean, my God, by the time they graduate, they're like little Einsteins. And then you see the American kids. Like totally, and they're like popping M&Ms, sitting in front of the TV and studying. We gotta like study for our biology test as they're crunching on M&Ms with Grey's Anatomy playing in the background.
Yeah.
These kids could not hold a candle. They are done. And I was watching this and I'm like face palming myself. I'm like, oh my god. Oh my god. It's incredible.
Well, you see it in terms of the discussion of strategic policy and economic policy. That the We had a speaker at our conference who's an actual serious thinker, Andrei Kortunov from the Russian International Affairs Council, who's talking about why you need multilateralism as opposed to unilateralism. He was not pushing a Russian line. What he was saying could have been said by a competent American thinker 30, 40 years ago. But instead, today, you would hear this as, oh, there's another Putin apologist. This guy is not a Putin apologist. He's actually trying to figure out how we can avoid a confrontation between the US and Russia.
Yep.
But it really is. We've lost the sense. John Quincy Adams said it that we should not be a nation that goes looking for monsters in foreign countries
Yeah.
for fights. We should deal with the problems we have at home so that we're capable of addressing the world in a mature way. And you look at Pompeo, who's like a little kid, the bully who outweighs everyone by 100 pounds, who owns
Literally.
football. Yeah, and he owns the football, and if you don't play by his rules, he'll sit on you. That's his approach with sanctions, with wars, with threats. How is that encouraging people to have love and respect for the United States?
Yep.
They don't have respect for us. They see us as bullies. The what was it called? The economic hitman of John Perkins has now become the overall hitman with the U.S. dumb giant on a British leash. And
Yep.
we've got to change that. And what Richard Black said at the end of his presentation this last Saturday was that the kinds of discussions that we're having on these Saturday programs and that our organizers have every time they do something, that's what needs to take place so the American people get a different picture of what our nation's history is and what our potential is, as opposed to what the 250-pound bully can demand.
Exactly correct. Very well said. Harley, we're at the end of the program. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us these insights. Folks, once again, you can capture Harley. You can follow Harley over at LaRouchePack.com and theshillerinstitute.org. Any last words, Harley?
Yeah, people can hang with me at that site. And if you want to talk to me directly, you can still reach me through my personal email, which is harleysch@gmail.com, HARLEYSCH@gmail.
And with that being said, enjoy your weekends. I mean, your weeks.